Hey, this is Kurt Danielson from Tad and Purple Strange, and you're listening to the Nothing Shocking podcast.
Want to know what's going on in the world of music? Then tune in to the Nothing Shocking podcast, a non-genre based, all ages friendly rock and roll program. Join us weekly for interviews with all your favorite rock stars from the mainstream to the underground. You can find us at nothingshocking.libsyn.com or anywhere you download podcasts.
We're putting the band back together.
The numbers all go to 11.
I'm talking about bands that rock. Led Zeppelin. What about Sabbath? AC/DC. Motorhead.
Does that mean it's louder? Is it any louder?
Well, it's one louder, isn't it?
We're not worthy! We're not worthy!
Why don't you just make 10 louder and make 10 be the top number and make that a little louder?
These go to 11.
I get up off the ground and raise my head. Days like this, think I should be dead. One for Satan, two for me. Let's cheat the devil, it's fun, don't you agree?
Welcome to the Nothing Shocking podcast. I'm your co-host, Jeff Untied, and with me in Dog Bowl Studios is
Coach Nez.
You can find the Nothing Shocking podcast on Libsyn or any podcatchers. Like our Facebook page or follow us on Twitter at NoShockPod.
You can also find the Nothing Shocking podcast on Rock Rage Radio every Sunday morning at 7 a.m. Central Time. Our sponsor is Ragged Records, located in downtown Rock Island, Illinois, and downtown Davenport, Iowa. We'd like to thank the Hong Kong Sleepover for allowing us to use their music for our intro and bumper ending. Tonight's guest is
Kurt Danielson
of Purple Strange,
Tad,
Vaporland,
and Bundle of Hiss.
Yeah, promoting, well, in the process of putting the new material together for Purple Strange's second album.
Yeah, I'm excited about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, very engaging interview, great talk. Let's get to that interview right now.
All right. Good night.
Good night. Kurt, welcome to the Nothing Shocking podcast. I'd like to introduce you my co-host, Jeff Untied.
Kurt, thanks for joining us tonight.
Hi, Jeff. My pleasure.
Hey, thank you for your willingness to participate. So, Purple Strange is in the studio recording music for the band's second album. How much progress has the band made towards the second album?
Well, actually, I could back up a little bit. We had a record come out about 2 years ago.
Right.
That is, it was available via downloads and CD, but the vinyl was delayed because of the industry being all balled up, supply chain problems, and pressing plants burning down and stuff. So there was a huge backlog of records to be pressed, and so it took like a year for that record to actually appear in vinyl, and that just happened like a month ago.
Oh, wow.
And so in reality, even though the record came out to some degree like 2 years ago, and also the pandemic had something to do with all these delays, no doubt. The vinyl just came out like a month ago, and so that to us signals the actual release of that record.
Yeah.
Even though it's 2 years old, and we played some shows to commemorate that. We played a kind of a celebratory gig at a record store called Easy Street Records out in West Seattle, and that went really well. And sold a bunch of records there and autographed a bunch more, and we were happy with that. At the same time, in the past 2 years, we didn't practice as much as we wanted to because of the pandemic, and our drummer was out of commission because of it. He just chose to isolate himself, and so we had a friend come in and play drums, and Jack and Dino, our guitar player, also played drums, and we wrote a bunch of songs using those guys on drums, and we recorded like rough versions of them and played some shows with Scott, this friend of ours who played drums for us, and that went really well. And then Vern, our drummer, came back a couple of months ago, and he played that record store show with us. That was Record Store Day too, by the way. That was part of that gig. And it's hard to get all this stuff in order in my mind. Anyway, we just played this last week at a place called Slim's in Georgetown, and that's like an outdoor kind of bar situation, and that went really well too. And we've been recording our practices with Vern since he returned, and he's slowly learned all the songs. Usually we like to have him involved from the get-go as we write the songs, but this time that wasn't possible, except for the brand new ones we'll be writing shortly. But we've got about 9 or 10 songs, and we've recorded maybe 6 of those. We actually ended up practicing yesterday, and we recorded, I think, 5 of those. No, maybe 6 of those yesterday, and we've got some other versions too, and we'll just have to pick out the best ones. And so we are like over halfway done with the basic tracks. All the overdubs and stuff still need to be done, and the vocals and everything. But it's coming along nicely, and it's a departure from what we did on the first record. And I don't know when it'll come out, but probably sometime this next year, I would imagine.
Yeah, very good.
Nice. I was wondering if you could settle a little score with us. So we've had Jack and Dino and Ron 9 on, and both of them were very, kind of shy about their guitar playing, but yet very praising of the other. What are your thoughts on their guitar playing?
Well, they work great together. They're both great guitar players. I love playing with them both. I played in a band with Ron previous to this called Vaporland.
Yeah.
And we have a record out on Strange Earth, which is the same label that Purple Strange is on.
Nice.
And so I've actually got a long association with Ron. In fact, way back in like 89, right when Tad was starting, Tad and I were already working together. We had started to record God's Balls. And Ron, who'd been in Room 9, which is a Seattle band that has deep roots, and was one of the main bands that I was obsessed with in those days. He was looking for something to do, and he wanted me and Tad to play on some demos of some songs that he had that would later become Love Battery songs. And so we went down to our practice space. Ron brought a 4-track, and we recorded like 4 songs, I believe. One of them was Between the Eyes. I remember that much. And it sounded pretty cool. But Tad and I were already committed to Tad, and we were like faced with more recording, touring, everything. And it seemed like we just didn't have time to devote to another project as much as we wanted to do so. And for Tad, he played drums on these demos, and he was trying to move away from drums and into playing guitar. And that's, of course, what he did in Tad. And so his focus was on continuing with his journey into guitar playing. And so we decided just to do that. And Ron found other players to form Love Battery with. And since that time, Ron and I have remained friends. I've lived in France for some years in the early 2000s, and when I came back, we hooked up again and started playing and got Vaporland together. And we were just really good friends, had a lot in common musically, and have always gotten along. So we were going to do another Vaporland record, actually, but our drummer in that band, Garrett Chavlik, the drummer for The Fluid back in the day, he decided to move on. So we were without a drummer. We tried to find a new one, but we couldn't actually replace Garrett. He was like such an integral part of the band. The chemistry of a given band is so important and delicate. And once you remove someone, it really changes that chemistry. And we just couldn't bring ourselves to play with a new drummer. We just decided to, actually at the same time, we were still mulling this over. our friend Stroud, who's the singer for Purple Strange, he was bugging us to get a band together. And so we decided, Ron and I and Jack and our friend Vern, who plays drums in Purple Strange. Vern also runs the label, and he owns the studio where we rehearse and record. We decided we'd give it a shot, and it turned out so well that we decided just to focus on Purple Strange for the time being, anyway.
Yeah.
And I'm, Stroud is a really great singer, good lyricist, and I really enjoy playing with him, writing songs with him. It's just a different thing than I've ever done before. I don't know how to describe it. It's like in previous bands, in my experience, have always been democratic, and everybody kind of just brings their ideas in. We write songs together. Everybody writes their own parts, etc. The same thing is true in Purple Strange, but Stroud is an extremely good vocalist, and on a different level from anybody I've ever worked with before. And in the past, I would write lyrics for whatever band I was in, and contribute vocals and stuff. But in this band, he's got all that covered already. So I just sit back and focus on the bass. And I think at this stage in life, that's where I feel most comfortable. I still write, of course, and I write my own bass parts, obviously. But I mean, as far as lyrics and stuff, instead of contributing lyrics to the band, I'm now working on fiction, and all my ideas as far as writing goes go into that, and then there's the music. So I still do both things. It's just in the past I would write books, but I would never finish them. But finally now I've got a book that I've got over 1,000 pages, and it's basically finished. I'm just tinkering with it at this stage.
Nice.
Very good. I guess when it comes to fan expectations for this upcoming second album for Purple Strange, how many tracks will you guys focus in for this album? Is it going to be 10, 12, what have you? And, as far as sonically, was it one of those kind of things, hey, if it's not broke, don't fix it? Is it going to be, sonically a very similar sound to the first album?
Well, I think it reflects a certain evolution. We're more comfortable playing together. We've kind of developed our songwriting style as a group. Our chemistry has kind of matured a bit. And like with the first record, Stroud would bring basic ideas for all the songs, except for a couple. And Ron had a few ideas for a couple songs. And we just wrote parts for them all, and the basic template of each song already existed before the band put their finishing touches on them. For the most part, there were a couple that were written more spontaneously. This time, all the songs are written spontaneously by the group all together, so it's a little different in that regard. One thing I liked about that first record is that there's a lot of different kinds of songs on there. There's poppier tunes, more punk rock songs, a lot of psychedelic songs.
Yeah.
Some are softer and slower. Some are reflect other influences, like there's Spanish guitar in one song in particular. This record it has that same kind of variety, but I think it's heavier. In a general sense, it's more guitar based. It's still very psychedelic. That's Ron's influence, but I think it's a more mature record. I mean, I don't mean to say that it's a more boring record or a more staid or old fashioned record. I just mean that it reflects a certain progress in the development of the band's chemistry as songwriters. And on two songs for this record, I brought in ideas, and Stroud wrote lyrics for them, and the band worked out the music for them, and they turned out really well. and Ron did the same with a bunch of songs. Jack has yet to do that, but I know he's got some ideas. I'm sure we'll work on those too in due course. We only get a chance to practice usually once a week, sometimes twice. So we're always kind of trying to catch up with ourselves, and there's always something else to do down the road, which we haven't got to yet, but we've talked about it.
Oh, very good.
Well, as far as musical instruments, you play bass. Do you use the same bass? Do you have a trusty bass, or do you have multiple basses?
Well, I have only one bass nowadays. It's the bass I always had back in the TAD days. It's a 62P bass. And I had other basses, but I went through a long period of drug addiction, and a lot of them, well, one of them got stolen on the road. We were in Boston at the Middle East, and my roadie, I think, was partying and not paying attention, and so I lost a jazz bass that way. And but it was my fault too, because I should have been washing, but I was also partying. But since then, there was the long period of addiction, and another bass that I had got pawned, never recovered. That's a long story, but kind of a sad story too. But thankfully, I always retained my Fender P bass, the 62, which is my favorite bass anyway. But it easily could have gotten lost somewhere along the way, and I'm very lucky that it hasn't. And I just stick with that. One thing I've noticed is that with bass, the most important thing is the bass itself. Amplification, speakers, those are important, but not as important as the bass. If you've got a good bass, you can make it work with any kind of a setup. And my opinion is that all kinds of effects and pedals and stuff, those can be cool. I've gone down that path before. I used to use all kinds of weird effects and different setups simultaneously. But did it really improve my tone? I don't think so, to be quite honest. It was fun to do, and it's a fun thing to explore. But for me personally, the main thing is the bass itself. And if it sounds good acoustically, it should sound like a piano. And if you can retain that tone with your amplification, then you got it. That's all you need. It's sometimes necessary to fool around with other things to come back to the truth. And I found that is true in my case. But with me, that truth is a very simple thing.
Oh, very good. When it comes to playing live shows and support of new material that has been released, I guess, at this stage of the game with you and the rest of the band, what are the plans going to be for you guys to support this new album when it comes out? Is it going to be much of a touring schedule for you? Or are you guys going to keep it semi-local? How's it going to all work?
Well, it's hard to say. It depends on opportunity to some degree. I think all of us are open to considering going further afield if the opportunities are right. We're older, we've got established lives. Some of us are married, have other, jobs and obligations. So if we were given the right opportunities, the right incentives, so to speak, perhaps we would consider going further. Right now, we're thinking about playing down in Portland, which is like a 3-hour drive from Seattle. That would be cool. And playing not just in Seattle, but up and down the sort of Puget Sound region, like up to Bellingham, maybe Vancouver, down to Portland, and then just kind of, playing it by ear, taking it step by step, see where it goes. But if something else came up, if we were offered to play some festivals or a tour, if we had a real booking agent, that might be easier. But we'll see.
Yeah, very good.
Just see what happens.
Very good.
Yeah.
Being a fan of the grunge scene from the '90s, this is right in my wheelhouse because you got Purple Strange and you got connections to Tad and Love Battery, some of my favorite bands. But I just recently discovered Vaporland and got into that. But I'm super excited about Bundle Hiss. Can you talk more about? I think there was some demos that you guys had that kind of were lost and then rediscovered and then recently released.
So Bundle of Hiss was the band I started in high school with a bunch of high school friends. This was like 1979 or 1980 or so. And it was the band that I learned to play bass in and for. And I had some really supportive friends who joined me in that endeavor, all of whom in the course of time left and moved on to do other things. But they were replaced one by one by other people, other friends of mine. For example, we finally ended up in Seattle in about 83, 84, and the original guitarist left to go to school. He studied computer science and did really well in that, by the way, but he was the guy that taught me how to play the bass in the first place. It was sad seeing him go, but he had his dreams, and that was cool. I was supportive of that. Original singer, he moved on. He became a history teacher and administrator, now retired. And the original drummer became the singer, and then he sort of moved on into doing more country western and folk-based stuff. And so what was left was Dan Peters on drums, who later played in Mudhoney, and my friend Jamie, who I met at a poetry workshop at the University of Washington. And he became the guitar player, and he became the singer as well. And so as a three-piece, we recorded first with Jack and Dino in like 86, and then with a friend of ours named Rick Vaughn, we recorded a bunch more songs. And then they kind of got set aside, those tapes did, and sort of forgotten about until at some point in the 90s, Loveless Records, label out of Seattle, Pete Nordstrom's label. Pete is the bass player in Stag, another Seattle band that's still putting out records. He was the one, he was a friend of Jamie's, and he's the one that put out those found tapes. And there were still some songs that were lost. And one of those came out subsequently on a label based in England. They did like a compilation of sort of obscure Seattle band songs, and one of those songs appears on that, which is great because we thought that song was lost. And I think Jack found it when he was salvaging. Jack had to take these tapes in order to create the CD that came out, and bake them physically to revive them and preserve them, and then he was able to remix them and then get them mastered and make them suitable for playing. And he did a great job. He's done that for a lot of bands. Jack is really good like that. He kind of considers it his responsibility to document all the bands that he's worked with over the years, and we're very lucky that he agreed to do that for us too.
Oh, so cool. Well, this is going to be a long question here, so I hope you have patience with me.
Sure.
It wouldn't behoove us not to talk about the elephant in the room, which is Tad. Tad is recognized as one of the pioneers of the Seattle sound back in the day. I guess maybe can you talk a little bit more about your thoughts about being a part of such a, I don't know what we considered a revolutionary band of that time period and that sound? Can you kind of pave the way for us?
Yeah, sure. So Tad and I first met in 88 or so, 87 maybe. He had moved to Seattle with his band H Hour. He played drums for them, and Bundle of Hiss played several shows with H Hour. They were a great band, and we loved playing with them, and that's how I became friends with Tad, and that was a very natural thing. We had a lot in common, and we started hanging out and listening to records and smoking weed and drinking beer. And so when H Hour broke up suddenly, Tad made it known to me that he wanted to play guitar, and he started actually writing songs, and he worked with Bruce Pavitt at the time, who was interested in Tad, and Tad had gone into reciprocal recording and recorded 3 songs, playing all the instruments by himself, drums, bass, guitar, and vocals, of course. Mm-hmm. And I was actually at least one of those sessions, and I was amazed to watch him work. I always loved his drum playing. Tad is a pummeling drummer. I've never seen anybody hit the drums so hard. And Dan Peters and I used to watch him play, and just our jaws would drop. Just an amazing drummer, and different from any other drummer I'd ever seen or played with. So we got to talking, and he'd already recorded the what would become his first Sub Pop single, right? So Ritual Device and Daisy. And I invited him to play guitar in Bundle of Hiss. Actually, first I asked him to play drums, and we thought we'd have two drummers, Dan and Tad, but their styles didn't really mesh, and besides, Tad really wanted to play guitar, so we're like, okay, go ahead, play guitar. And we recorded a few songs with Tad on guitar and doing some backup vocals, and that was really cool. And this was, Dan had already started playing in Mudhoney, so this is probably sometime in '88. And Sub Pop was considering putting out this Bundle of Hiss material at this point. But then suddenly Jamie, our guitarist, decided to go to grad school at Syracuse in New York, and we were just stunned. For me, it was a big deal because it was the band I'd been in for the last decade. Mm-hmm. And so it was like an identity crisis. And Tad and I were sitting there with Dan after the meeting when Jamie announced that he was quitting, and we're like, what are we going to do? I mean, Dan, you're already playing in Mudhoney. Obviously, that's what you're going to do, but what are we going to do? And he was like, well, didn't Tad just record a single? And Sub Pop had by this time agreed to put it out because Bruce was way into it. He said you could put a band together and play those songs and write some more and record a record. Maybe Sub Pop would put that out. And we're like, oh, that's not a bad idea. Wish we'd thought of it, but thankfully he did. And so we set about finding a drummer and another guitar player to flesh out the sound. And I thought of Gary, who was the guitar player in a band called the Tree Climbers, which was the band that John Poneman from Sub Pop played bass for. And interestingly enough, the drummer for that band is the drummer who stands in for Purple Strange sometimes when Vern can't practice. That's Scott Vanderpool. Anyway, I called up John and asked if he'd mind if Gary played guitar for us. He said, no, not at all. Here's his number. And so I called him and we set it up. And Tad knew Steve, who would become our drummer from gigs that HR had played with the band. Steve was in a band called Death and Taxes. And I'd seen him play too and really liked him. So we took those two guys into the practice space and started writing songs. And within like 2 weeks, we were already in the studio recording songs for God's Balls, the first Tad record. And it all happened really fast. And shortly thereafter, we were doing our first West Coast tour with Pussy Galore. Even before God's Balls came out, we had a few tracks recorded, but we didn't record them all at once. We did them in a couple different sessions, and by that time, we had a few songs recorded, but really all there was Tad's single. And but that was a really cool experience. It was nice to meet those guys, and really fun to play with them. I love Pussy Galore, great band. Mm-hmm. And so subsequent to that West Coast tour, which was like, I don't know, 10 days at the most, we finished God's Balls, and then we did a U.S. tour, right before which we played at the Moore Theater in Seattle with Nirvana and Mudhoney. That's the Lame Fest #1. Mm-hmm. And that was really cool. It was a bigger venue than any of us were used to. And it kind of signaled Sub Pop's arrival on the pop cultural scene in Seattle. And then we did do a major U.S. tour. And then that fall, this would be the fall of '89, we toured Europe with Nirvana. And just before the tour started, we recorded with Steve Albini in Chicago and did Salt Lick. So, and Nirvana actually recorded an EP, the Blue EP. And so we both had records to promote. And we spent 5 or 6 weeks on the road in Europe doing that. And this all happened in the space of 6 months. So,
wow.
Before, things are different now, things happen at a different pace. But what's happening now feels good, better than anything I've felt since those days, which is probably impossible to replicate. But what feels good is that the songs come easy. There's a great sense of joy playing with these guys, and that's the important thing, after all. If you're not having fun and enjoying yourself and, expressing yourself creatively, if your goals are to make money or whatever, that's not going to work. It just doesn't work out that way. If you start with the fundamentals, the essential things, and focus on that, other things can possibly happen. Don't really care if they do or not, because what's important is the songs.
Absolutely. All right, well, I want to kind of lead off to what we just kind of talked about with the Tad origins. God's Balls is my favorite album from Tad, and it's just amazing. Behemoth being the first track off that album, it was just seems like it's the perfect first track for any album. Can you just kind of talk more about the creation of the God's Balls album? How it was schematically planned out. How did you guys get it all together? Because that thing, it still holds its weight today.
Yeah.
Well, it was written quickly and recorded kind of, not all at once, or conceived of all at once, but it did happen fast. So I think the first 3 songs we wrote were Sex God Missy, Boiler Room, and Satan's Chainsaw. And we recorded those 3 together in one day, and with Jack, of course. And that kind of gave us, those being the first songs we'd done as a band, kind of gave us an idea of what we could do going forward. And I don't remember the exact sequence of the rest of the record, but I know that Behemoth in particular came out of an experience that Tad and I had. This is a funny story. We were in the U District near the University of Washington. I lived in that neighborhood, and we were in a bar. It was me and Tad, Dan Peters, our friend Dick Johnson, and my brother, and a few others. We were sitting in a bar. We'd just taken acid, and the acid was hitting, and we got thrown out of the bar. And so it was 1 a.m. or so, and the plan was to get some beer and go back to my apartment, which was 5 blocks away. We had to walk down this main street. It's called the Ave, or University Avenue, and to get the beer and to get to my place. And we were walking along, and we were, extremely high. And I remember there were a lot of frat boys driving around looking for beer or drugs, and guys hanging out of car windows, begging people on the street for whatever. And Dick Johnson started toying with these people, taunting them, pretending he was dealing just to get their reaction. And one guy just climbed out of the car and was reaching for him and wanted, he claimed that he had something this guy wanted. And of course he was joking. And so when it came to that point of confrontation, he said, I'm a cop. And that flipped the guy out. He hopped back in the car, he sped off. This was really funny at the time. Yeah. And we continued walking. We kind of fragmented into different groups as we walked down the street. And we saw these guys coming towards us on the other side of the street. And they were big guys, 400 pounds, but not obese. They were muscular dudes, right? And they crossed over the street and started walking towards us. And later we would find out they were looking for frat boys to beat up. And they probably would have just ignored us. But one of the guys that was with us laid on his back like a dog, waving his legs in the air. Of course, he was extremely high, like the rest of us. And I couldn't hear what he was saying to them, but they were like glowering down on him and in a threatening way. So like Dan went back up there and talked to him and tried to get Tom, that was our friend, away from them, but he wouldn't listen. Tad went up there, tried the same thing. Finally, I think Dan succeeded in getting Tom to come on and join us. And I would come around the corner to where my apartment was, and the rest of the guys were on their way. They'd rounded the corner too. I was almost to the door, and suddenly I turn around and I see these guys just galloping towards us like an avalanche coming right at us. And they had been wearing these weightlifting belts, these thick leather belts around their waists. They'd taken those off and they were swinging them around their heads like lassos, And Dick Johnson stepped forward and said, "Hey, relax. There's no problem here." And they whacked him across the face with that belt, and down he went. And I took refuge behind Tad. I figured they're not going to fuck with Tad. And even if they do, I'm safe. I'm behind him. And boom, they hit Tad. Down Tad goes, and he crushed a bush that's dead to this day, I'm sure. And then I was standing there vulnerable, and they whacked me, and I went down. Dan retreated to the door, and he turned, and as they converged on him, he lashed out, started kicking them and throwing punches. That pissed them off. They took him and threw him through the window, or the glass door.
Oh, wow.
And it was like an antique, sort of alcove doorway. Mm-hmm. And so that was unfortunate. But the worst part about it was that it dislocated Dan's shoulder, which he kind of realized afterwards. In the meantime, my brother ran to the IHOP, which was adjacent on the next corner, where there was a cop, and brought the cop back over with him. And so those guys got arrested and questioned, and they claimed that they were looking for frat boys to beat up, and that one of us had propositioned them about some kind of drugs. That's apparently what Tom was asking for. And they took offense to that, and that's why they attacked us. And they claimed it was our fault. But we just, I didn't know what was going on at the time. Still very high, all these cops around, and Dan is injured, and this is right on the eve of Mudhoney's first European tour. And so the question is he going to be able to play? We took him to the hospital, and they checked him out, and they said that he probably could play. He just has to take it easy. They apparently did some adjustments on the shoulder, and it was like dislocated, but not seriously, and they got it back into shape. And so as it turned out, happy ending. Dan was able to play, and on top of that, I had an idea for a song, so I wrote out the words. I had Tad come over. I had a really shitty acoustic guitar. I played him the music for it, and he said, "Cool." And so we took that into the practice space and made a song out of it, which really worked because of the way Steve played drums. Kind of that tribal drum part is the backbone of the song, and conveys the sort of alarm and dread that is implicit in the situation. Later, though, we had to go to court, and the prosecutor wanted to crucify these guys, calling them animals. But we couldn't identify them. We were so high that all these guys in the dock looked the same. And we were supposed to point out which ones in this group of 12 or 15 were our assailants. And they were already in jail. They had been in jail the whole time because they were transients. So they were going to stay in jail anyway. And I wasn't about to finger somebody that I couldn't identify with confidence. Neither were any of the rest of us. So we refused to cooperate with the prosecutor, who was notorious for the way he treated, prisoners. And, it just, the whole thing was kind of bizarre. But for a while, I was kind of afraid that one of those guys was going to come around my place and attack me again. But I ended up moving, so it didn't matter anyway, whether they did or not. But yeah, that was that's always been my sort of approach, is to make art out of things that really happened. If whatever happened sort of sticks in your mind and creates an atmosphere, then that's probably worth pursuing.
That is the most interesting story I've ever heard for a song creation. Fantastic. Jeff, you got the next question?
Yeah, you talked a little bit about your book that you're working on. Can you give us a little bit more details about,
Well, I can give you a few. I don't really talk about it.
Yeah.
The reason I never finished any books before is because I would talk about it, and I subsequently realized that kind of it's a delicate process, right?
Yeah.
That kind of subverts the process. Self-sabotage is what it is, at least in my case. I will say that it's a fictional memoir. In other words, it's a memoir written by a character that doesn't exist.
Okay.
I was able to plug some of my experience into the book, but it's not about me, except for in some very indirect ways. This character is a very unpleasant person, and it's been very difficult to assume that personality while writing this book, and it has grown way beyond my original scope. I'll tell you the story that is the seed for the whole book, and that is, I work in retail, and a friend of mine came into the store and said, "Hey, did you read that news story about this guy who cut his girlfriend's head off because God told him to do it?" And I said, "No." And I found the newspaper. I read the article. It was very brief, not many details. But the idea was to sort of get into this guy's head and figure out how he came to do what he did. And it was a step-by-step process. I got deeper and deeper into it. And now it's a book about memory and identity as much as anything else, but the kernel of it is that murder. Mm-hmm. And so you're talking about a very unbalanced, mentally ill person. And I sort of made up his illness and all the symptoms and everything else. I studied those syndromes first, but I plugged them in where they fit. And that's kind of the basic story. But there's a lot more to it than that, which I won't go into.
Oh, so cool. I have one last question for you, and then we'll leave you alone for the evening. Does that sound good?
Sure.
All right. Well,
yeah.
The mystery of rock and roll. You were part of a movement that had a big mystery to it in the late 80s, early 90s. The dawning of the internet, social media has kind of sucked away the mystery of rock and roll. There's no mystique to it anymore. The social media just kind of opens everything up about it. The artist that went through the mystery of rock and roll back in the grunge days, the Seattle sound days, and like I said, you've been through it. What do you prefer? Do you prefer the mystique of rock and roll, or do you like the accessibility, what the internet and social media gives us?
Well, on some level, it doesn't really matter what I think, because we are stuck with what we have. Right. So I try to recognize the advantages, the increased availability of stuff versus the loss of what you call that mystique. And what's better? Of course, the past always looks better. Childhood always seems, well, for most people, to be better. Mm-hmm. The good old days, for example. But I see it as a mixed blessing. You can distribute your music a lot more easily, more instantaneously, more cheaply than ever before. Mm-hmm. But on the flip side of that is you've got all these streaming services that skim off all the profits, and you're lucky to see a few cents a month, a year, if that, from Spotify, et cetera, et cetera. And, that is definitely not a good thing. The artist income of the artist is not really respected or protected by the way things are now. And I think that has to change eventually for artists to survive. Obviously, artists are doing what they can, surviving by playing live and selling merchandise. So the emphasis has shifted. The thing is that intrinsically, writing songs, performing them, is not really a capitalist endeavor. It is an artistic endeavor. But the way the internet works is it monetizes everything. So I think that's really unfortunate. And to get around that is difficult. I tend to just not really care about it, not to think about it, and just do what we do and focus on, the artistic aspect of things, the satisfaction of writing, recording, and performing. And let the chips fall where they may.
Very good. Very good. Like I said, we're out of our allotted time for this evening. Is there anything that we left off that you would like to promote or plug?
Let's see. Not that I can think of. I know I sent you a list. I can't recall what was on it besides Purple Strange and the book and the previous bands. I think we covered pretty much everything. I will say that I did an interview like a week ago for a production crew that is putting together a documentary that will air on Showtime eventually. Nice. And that was like a 4-hour interview. It was very involved. And the problem for me was that I was really rusty. And so you guys got the benefit of me having gone through that, which kind of jogged my memory about all this stuff, because we talk about a lot of the same things.
Sure.
I was forced to go into more depth, entered areas probably I shouldn't have, wished that I hadn't. But anyway, I know, but I think this was more concise and in some ways faster moving. I found myself kind of hemming and hawing, trying to remember this or that. It's difficult because like the past is like a minefield, especially for the Tad story, because so many things happened, lawsuits, et cetera, that it's kind of a painful trek down memory lane. And this was more pleasant, maybe because I've been thinking about it and it wasn't such a shock. With all due respect, those guys did a great job, though, and I'm expecting their documentary to be awesome.
Oh, fantastic!
Yeah. Well, they're very articulate and well thought out questions, and their whole approach is really impressive. They're doing like a retroactive look at the Seattle scene, trying to go as far back as they can, get as many voices, like a mosaic of voices, because their feeling is there's no actual truth, objectively speaking, no definitive truth, no overarching narrative that explains or justifies everything. All you have are all these voices of people who survived that were there at the time. And so they'll create this sort of mosaic of voices and let that stand in for this non-existent objective truth.
Wow.
Man, I can't wait to see it.
Yeah, exactly. Well, this is how things are going to work out. We're about 3 weeks behind on our episodes, so we're looking at about between 3 to 4 weeks to release this. Once Jeff, the editing wizard, gets it all cleaned up, I'll send it to you immediately. Please share it to whatever socials you're part of, and we'll do the same thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much, Kurt.
Yeah, thank you.
My pleasure, Eric, Jeff.
Yeah.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah,
Nice to meet
enjoyed
you.
Purple Strange. Can't wait to hear more.
Yep, absolutely.
Awesome.
All right, man.
Thanks, man.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Have a good one. Thank you. Bye-bye.
bites their tongue and pays their bills instead. Hide in the spotlights, fight the grip of death. You can have the air you need, but you best not take one breath. Hey. Roll the dice. Take your chances. Everybody knows the game is fixed, there is no prize. Everybody pulls the plug and says their last goodbyes. Move to the sunshine, fight the grip of nights. If they ever take from you, then you plug out both their eyes. Hey. Roll the dice. Take your chances.
Welcome to the night. You think you know Night Demon? Then the Night Demon Heavy Metal Podcast is for you. Step into the darkness as we peel back the curtain to give you an unprecedented, all-access look into the mind and the heart of the demon. We're talking band history, song analysis, studio anecdotes, stories from the road. It's everything a diehard Night Demon fan could want and more. This is the only place to learn the inside scoop, the deep dive trivia, the untold tales from the band members themselves and those closest to the Night Demon story. Need more? The sacred Night Demon Crypt will be pried open to reveal demo recordings that have never before seen the light of day, all with in-depth commentary by the band and the people who were there for the writing and recording process. This is a gold mine, a treasure trove of all things Night Demon. Head over to nightdemon.net or wherever you listen to podcasts.